So the water quality in this pond is the ammonia is 0, nitrite is near 0. There's basically no nitrate in the water. The pH is very high, and due to the fact that there's a lot of cement around the pond, you'll find that the pH in this pond will always be high. It is unlikely that this pond is going to go acidic due to what the pond is made of. The KH is 4, which I'm happy with, and the GH is 0, so the general hardness is 0, and it's been filled with tank water. So therefore you don't really need water age in tank water because there's not chlorine in tank water. And this pond doesn't really need KH because of what it's made of. But it would be very good for the fish to get some general hardening salts. Now, general hardening salts are really not a make or break thing. But as far as the immune system of the fish is concerned, it's a very, very good idea. It really helps to heal any wounds they've got. And over a long period of time, having a GH of like at least 8, probably more like 12, is very beneficial for these fish. So even if you just added a little bit of rock salt, it would really, really help. But in a perfect world, say some GH salts would really help the immune system of the fish. Once again, particularly in times of trouble, is when the immune system is most needed. So in this pond, we mainly have koi carp meaning coloured carp. So these fish were originally European carp, which obviously come from Europe, which are a very large, very noxious fish. Now, in Japan, about 1,000 years ago, once Europeans started coming over to Japan, in the area around Niigata, the rice farmers of that region would often put European carp into their dams, in their rice paddies. Because what would happen is a lot of these very poor rice farmers would look for a fish source that they could eat in the effect of a bad season, and they get bad crops. So they would then be able to eat the fish. Now, European carp are terrible eating, but I guess if you're desperate, you're desperate. And they basically found that these were the toughest fish on earth that could survive in that environment. Now, what makes these fish so interesting is that about 1,000 years ago in Japan, when they started to do this, what the farmers started doing is started realizing that the odd fish would have different colors. And then they were actually ingenious enough to start putting the different colored ones in the same ponds. And then they started to learn that you could create different colors by segregating the different colors. And that was the earliest example of starting to understand genetics. So let's say 1,700 years ago, they actually started creating the colors of these koi. And then there's a story that says that a couple of hundred years ago or whatever it was, the actual emperor of Japan went to a agricultural fair that was on in Ogata in Japan, and then the farmers were all telling him the story about how they were creating these beautiful coloured fish, and he was so impressed that he got the farmers to line up their fish, because at this time the farmers were all bringing their best coloured fish to this fair to show them off to each other, and they were buying and selling them and so forth. And once the actual emperor found that about this, he got them to line up all the fish, and he paid the equivalent of, let's call it $1 million or a lifetime salary to one of the farmers for one of the fish. And he said, I'll be back next year, so bring all your best fish because I'll buy another one. And he took them to his pond, which was in his imperial garden in Tokyo. And then all of the other dignitaries and so forth all caught on And that's where koi auctions started. So what happened is all the dignitaries that followed him around all started auctioning to buy the best fish. And then these auctions have been traditions for like hundreds of years. And so the best fish are to go to the richest families, and that's a real status symbol to the Japanese people. The nishikigoi or koi is the national fish or the national animal, and they really pride themselves on having the absolute best fish, which are bought at koi auctions. Now, when koi breed, it's the same as when a goldfish breeds. What they do is scatter eggs. So what you'll see is you'll see them excitedly swimming up and bumping into each other. And when you see them doing that, what will happen is the female will spray eggs, release eggs all around the place, and the males will try to fertilize those eggs. And when they're doing it, you'll see very excited movement as they're all running around. And as the female is laying the eggs, the male is trying to fertilize them. And the other fish are running around trying to get a free meal at the same time. So the way they breed is they scatter the eggs everywhere. And they can scatter literally thousands of eggs. Which means if you've got a real big fish and you've got a real small pond, this can be a problem. Because that's a whole bunch of nutrients suddenly released into your pond. Now with a large pond like this, normally it will be fine. But in the bottom of the pond, if there's crevices or little bunches of algae or something that the egg can fall into, then the eggs have a chance of hatching. Then the eggs that hatch, if there's crevices and places where the baby fish can hide, the smartest of the smart will survive. And this pond here, if you look very carefully, there is baby fish in here. So they do actually breed. But once again, for the thousands of babies that will have had a go, it's only the very rare one that's actually going to grow up and make it past caviar, little what make it past growing up phase. And you do need to be aware that if your fish are breeding, that as you get more and more fish, which is inevitably going to happen if you're breeding the fish, that eventually you will reach what's called biological capacity. And biological capacity is where Mother Nature says, you have enough fish. Now, once you have enough fish, then you have a few options. One is do more maintenance, so more water changes, more filter cleans. That would help you out a little bit. Or you could consider removing some of the fish. If you do not do either of these options, or you do not recognize that Mother Nature has blown the whistle and decided that you are at biological capacity meaning how many fish Mother Nature says you can have, which is irrelevant to how many fish you think you can have, then either Mother Nature will knock a few of them off, making room for the other ones, or Mother Nature will send a disease and wipe a whole lot of them out, once again making room for the survivors. So every single environment has a capacity, and when you reach the capacity, Mother Nature will speak. So you'll start losing fish for what you think is no reason, but it is a reason. The reason is that Mother Nature has decided that you've reached your capacity. That's just something to be aware of. Now, one of the best ways to have nice crystal clear water is by having a UV sterilizer. Now, this thing here is a UV sterilizer. What happens with a UV sterilizer is the UV sterilizer has UVC ultraviolet light, and this light is poisonous. But this pump that's in here right now is very, very powerful. So if this pump is pumping the water through the UV sterilizer very quickly, the UV sterilizer will literally do nothing because the water goes through it way too fast. Meow. So therefore, there's no contact time with that poisonous light. Therefore, it will not function. So First key to UV sterilizers to make sure the water goes through it quite slowly, so you've got contact time, so the UV light can actually kill the bacteria in it. And if you go slow enough, it's actually possible you can even kill parasites, but that's a different conversation. But the other thing is you need to make sure that the globes are replaced on an annual basis. So inside here is a UV light tube, and once a year you want to replace that tube, because the intensity and spectrum of the tube over time will decrease, and then the light will not work. So what we want to do here is to replace that tube to make sure that the tube is functional, and then we're going to have to put the tube in a situation where it doesn't have a massive amount of water flow going through it. Now it's really important to be aware of advantage versus disadvantage. Now this thing here is an air pump, and it's horrendously noisy. Now the benefit of this air pump is putting a little bit of oxygen in the pond. So see the bubbles coming out in the pond. It's sort of good that there's some oxygen in the pond. But this sound, I think, is horrendous. So if we just listen to this, I just pull that out, listen to that. There's no way I'd want that sound all the time. So if it was up to me, I'd just pull out that old rattler out. I'd pull these air stones out. If I did want to keep the air stones, I'd get a nice new diaphragm pump that's quiet. There's no way I would want something in my front yard going. So I would get rid of that one, and I'd either lose the air stones altogether or get a nice new quiet one. You're only going to pay a couple of $100, but that's going to be a big sound gone. Or you can just pull the air stones out altogether, so that's not going to look terrible anymore. And then just for the sake of getting an extra pump, just to turn some water around. Because one of the things that this pond's really lacking is what's called kinetic energy. Now, kinetic energy is where you use the movement of the water to create the movement of the water. So by just placing a pump in there and turning the water around like this, that's going to create kinetic energy. And that's one of the best ways of keeping the pond clean, raising your dissolved oxygen level, raising your redox potential, and that pump would make absolutely no sound. So I would definitely look at just putting an extra pump in this pond, and I'd lose the air pump because I hate the sound of it.